Have you ever wondered why some products mysteriously disappear from store shelves or why certain items become more expensive for no apparent reason? This may seem like just another fluctuating market situation, but there is something
Be
more hidden
careful.
here. Today we delve into a shocking truth. There are 10 specific products the government doesn't want you to buy. These questions concern not only
Market
market
is shifting.
preferences or consumer demand. Behind them
We need
lies
to
a
control
hidden
the
agenda
narrative.
aimed at controlling your choices, managing supply chains, and shaping your food stock in ways that most people are unaware of. The first product is buckwheat, often mistakenly perceived as a grain, but actually a seed, rich in protein, fiber, and essential amino acids. This superfood is rich in minerals like magnesium, iron, and zinc, as well as antioxidants like rutin, which supports cardiovascular health by strengthening vessels and reducing inflammation. Despite its beneficial properties and popularity in various traditional diets worldwide, including Russian, Chinese, and Japanese cuisines, buckwheat faces declining production due to economic and agricultural changes. In recent years, there has been a significant reduction in buckwheat production, especially in the United States and Europe, where changes in agricultural policy sharply cut subsidies for farmers growing it. This trend is linked to several factors, including a global focus on monocultures that yield higher profits, such as corn and soy, as well as the influence of large agribusinesses lobbying for more profitable crops. Moreover, buckwheat requires specific conditions for optimal growth, including a cool climate and well-drained soil, limiting its adaptation in intensive industrial agriculture designed for genetically modified crops that thrive in various conditions. Moreover, the relatively low yield of buckwheat per acre compared to subsidized crops makes it less attractive to farmers who are pressured to maximize their incomes. Another obstacle is the lack of technological advancements in processing buckwheat compared to more commercially dominant grains. While corn and wheat benefit from advanced processing technologies that enhance their profitability and market appeal, the processing of buckwheat remains relatively archaic and labor-intensive, limiting its attractiveness in a profit-oriented agricultural economy. Moreover, the difficulties associated with growing buckwheat, such as its sensitivity to soil pH and the need for a delicate balance of nutrients, further repel farmers who receive recommendations from agronomists and politicians to switch to crops promising more stable yields and financial returns. These consultants often receive support from large agribusiness companies that prefer monocultures due to their ease of management and profitable markets for genetically modified crops, modified seeds, and related agrochemicals. This decline is not only a local problem, but a global trend, manifested in the reduction of areas allocated for buckwheat in countries that once heavily relied on its cultivation. The global reduction in buckwheat production also affects food security and biodiversity, as fewer farmers are planting buckwheat, leading to a decrease in the genetic diversity of this resilient crop. This increases vulnerability to pests, diseases, and changes in climatic conditions. The focus on monoculture farming reduces the resilience of the agricultural landscape, undermining efforts to create sustainable and diverse food systems. The reduction in the availability of buckwheat can have far-reaching consequences, affecting not only traditional dishes and cultural practices, but also limiting access to a valuable nutritional resource that could help solve global malnutrition issues. The second example is black beans, which were once a staple crop for many farmers in North and South America, but whose production has significantly declined due to changing agricultural priorities and economic pressures. Despite being rich in important nutrients like protein, fiber, iron, and folic acid, these beans do not receive adequate attention in modern agricultural subsidies and policies. Large food corporations successfully lobbied for support of crops that can be processed into high-margin products, such as corn for corn syrup or soy for various processed foods, pushing black beans out of the spotlight. The emphasis on monoculture farming, dominated by crops like corn or soybeans, leads to a decrease in crop diversity, including black beans. Monocultural systems are heavily supported by government subsidies, as they align with the industrialized model of food production that prioritizes efficiency and profit over nutritional diversity or ecological sustainability. This emphasis means that black beans, which are not easily integrated into the processed food industry, receive less financial support and resources for research and development. In addition, growing black beans often requires a lot of labor and more sustainable farming methods, such as crop rotation and organic soil management, which are not encouraged by current agricultural policies. As a result, farmers find themselves under financial pressure to switch to more profitable crops that require fewer resources. and are better suited for large agricultural machinery. The lack of investment in modernizing black bean cultivation technologies further reduces their competitiveness compared to crops that benefit from advanced agricultural technologies. The reduction of areas allocated for black beans is also exacerbated by trade policies that favor large producers and importers. Countries like Brazil and Argentina, which are major exporters of soy and corn, are increasingly shifting their agricultural focus towards these crops due to better trade agreements and higher global demand, leaving black beans sidelined. International trade emphasizes the export of high-profit, easily stored and processed goods, unlike nutritious but less in-demand items like black beans. Consumer trends towards convenient products have reduced the demand for whole, unprocessed foods, including black beans. The rise in popularity of fast food and ready-made meals has led to a decline in home cooking and traditional recipes, where black beans play an important role, which has also negatively affected their demand. Food producers prefer ingredients that can be easily transformed into long-lasting products with a long shelf life, which is significantly more difficult to achieve with fresh black beans. Nevertheless, black beans remain an important crop for food security in the regions where they continue to grow. However, without significant changes in agricultural policy and increased consumer awareness, their share will continue to decline, leading to reduced diversity in diets and undermining efforts to promote sustainable and nutritious food systems. Whole grain barley, as a resilient and adaptable crop, is also under threat from modern agricultural practices and economic policies. Unlike more commercially dominant cultures like corn and wheat, barley does not receive the same level of investment in research and development. This neglect is partly due to barley being less versatile in processed products and not yielding high profits for large agribusinesses that aim to maximize yield and profit from heavily subsidized crops. As a result, there is a noticeable reduction in barley production, especially in regions dominated by intensive monoculture farming. The nutritional benefits of barley, including its high beta-glucan content, a soluble fiber known for its ability to lower cholesterol and regulate blood sugar levels, were not enough to secure its place in the modern agricultural landscape. The demand for barley has also been undermined by its limited use in mass food production. Most of the barley grown today is used for animal feed or brewing, with only a small portion entering the human diet. Such a limited market makes barley less attractive to farmers, who are increasingly focused on profitability and the need to align with market trends that promote the sale of crops in various forms. The problems faced by barley are exacerbated by the lack of advocacy and support from agricultural lobbies that typically promote crops with higher market visibility. Unlike corn and wheat, which are actively supported by influential trade groups, barley lacks strong lobbying. This difference in advocacy efforts leads to a shortage of government incentives and subsidies that could help sustain barley production. Farmers often find themselves in a financially disadvantageous position by choosing to sow barley, as they do not receive the same economic benefits or risk reduction strategies available for other crops. Another problem is the limited development of barley breeding programs, while significant resources have been directed towards other crops. Funding for the development of high-yield corn and wheat varieties has sidelined barley breeding, making this crop more vulnerable to pests, diseases, and the impacts of climate change, which in turn discourages farmers from investing in its cultivation. The slow pace of technological innovations in barley farming leads to yields not increasing as quickly as other major crops, making barley a less attractive option for large-scale agribusiness. International market dynamics also play a role in reducing the significance of barley. Global trade agreements often focus on more economically advantageous crops, leaving barley with fewer export opportunities and reduced trade volume. This lack of attention to barley in international trade policy makes it less competitive in the global market, reducing its market potential and limiting economic viability for farmers seeking to export. The situation is exacerbated by changing consumer preferences towards more convenient processed products, which largely depend on corn and wheat-based ingredients. This shift led to a decrease in the use of whole grains, such as barley, in the daily diet, which reduced consumer demand. Without strong consumer interest, retailers have no incentive to offer whole grain barley, further diminishing its market presence and contributing to its decline. Nutritional yeasts, often used for their savory cheese flavor and impressive nutrient profile, also face barriers that limit their widespread adoption. Unlike many other plant products, yeast nutrients provide a complete source of protein, containing all 9 essential amino acids, and are rich in B vitamins, including vitamin B12. which is important for people following a vegan diet. Despite its advantages, the availability of yeast nutrients is limited by complex regulations shaped by powerful lobbying efforts of the dairy industry. This industry views yeast nutrients not only as an alternative to cheese, but also as a direct competitor that can undermine its market share due to the growing popularity among health-conscious consumers. In addition to tariffs and import restrictions, there are additional levels of regulation affecting the production of yeast nutrients in the country. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration recently introduced strict testing requirements for yeast products, citing concerns about microbial contamination. These regulations disproportionately affect small producers who lack the resources to undergo costly testing and certification processes. The increase in yeast control over nutrients occurs at a time when lobbying from the dairy industry intensifies, aiming to curb the spread of plant-based substitutes that threaten traditional dairy products. This regulatory pressure is exacerbated by marketing standards that classify yeast nutrients in a way that limits their advertising opportunities, such as restricting health benefit claims that can be made on packaging. This complicates consumer awareness and the acceptance of products, as the complexity of the supply chain for food yeast also affects its limited availability. Unlike more common agricultural products, the production of food yeast is highly specialized and depends on precise fermentation processes that have not found wide application in traditional farming. This specialization complicates the scaling of production and makes it more costly, especially under the growing demands from regulatory bodies. Moreover, most food yeast is enriched with synthetic vitamins and minerals, which requires adherence to strict quality and safety standards, adding another layer of cost and complexity. All these factors together reduce the incentives for new participants in the market, limiting competition and keeping prices at a relatively high level. International trade policies have also played a role in restraining the growth of the food yeast market. Producing countries face export restrictions in the form of tariffs and quotas, complicating their availability on a global scale. For example, the European Union increased import tariffs on food yeast products from non-EU countries, citing the protection of agriculture in the interests of local dairy companies. These trade barriers, combined with high tariffs in the United States, limit the global distribution of food yeast, making it less accessible and more expensive for consumers. Fresh herbs like basil, parsley, and coriander have also faced reduced availability and rising prices, mainly due to the efforts of large agricultural corporations seeking to protect their interests. These companies see the growing trend of home herb gardening as a significant threat to their profits. They lobby for legislation introducing strict regulations on the sale and distribution of herb seeds and plants. One such regulation is the mandatory quality certificates for seeds, which disproportionately affects smaller companies and local markets, making it difficult for consumers to purchase a variety of grass seeds at reasonable prices. In addition, the regulation of fresh herbs covers not only seeds and plants. There is a significant increase in inspections and rejections of fresh herb imports under the pretext of strict pest control measures. Many of these refusals are not based on real risks of pest infestation, but are used strategically to limit the import of competitive herbs from countries where they grow abundantly. These actions aim to ensure that local producers, often working under contracts with large agricultural companies, maintain their market share without the threat of cheaper imported alternatives. Moreover, there is a shift in marketing strategies that hinders consumers from growing their own herbs. Influential food corporations lobby for changes in agricultural extension services that traditionally provided information and resources to support home gardeners. Home gardening has undergone changes that significantly reduced public access to free or inexpensive educational materials promoting the benefits of growing herbs in one's own yard. At the same time, there is a rise in marketing campaigns emphasizing the convenience and supposed high quality of ready-made herbs. This approach diminishes the health benefits and economic efficiency of homegrown herbs and instead fosters dependence on purchased options, which are often less fresh and more expensive. The impact of these regulations and marketing strategies is exacerbated by the rise of patented herb varieties. Large agrarian companies have developed and patented special varieties of grasses that can resist common pests and diseases, but they are also designed in such a way that they cannot effectively reproduce seeds. This means that gardeners cannot save seeds from one season to the next, forcing them to buy new seeds every year, increasing costs and discouraging long-term gardening. This practice also limits biodiversity, reducing the variety of herb varieties available on the market, making it difficult for consumers to access traditional or vintage options that may have unique flavors or higher nutritional value. Transitioning to the eggs from hens kept in pastures, it is worth noting that such eggs are produced by hens that can roam freely outdoors, feeding on a natural diet of grass, insects, and seeds, which enhances the nutritional properties of the eggs. These eggs generally contain higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins A, D, and E, as well as antioxidants compared to regular eggs. Despite these advantages, the production of eggs from pasture-raised hens faces harsh criticism and pressure due to the lobbying efforts of large egg producers. These companies are interested in maintaining the dominance of factory-produced eggs, which are cheaper to produce due to economies of scale and lower costs. Egg producers from free-range hens face stricter regulatory standards, including mandatory certifications, extensive documentation, and frequent inspections. These inspections often require small farmers to invest in expensive equipment and modifications that are not necessary for the health and safety of the eggs, imposed to meet the strict standards set for large industrial operations. Moreover, the certification process often involves fees that are disproportionately burdensome for small farms, making it difficult for them to compete in the market. There are also targeted efforts to shape public opinion through marketing and labeling practices. Industrial egg producers often use terms like cage-free or free-range in misleading ways, making consumers believe they are buying a product similar to eggs from pasture-raised hens. However, these terms do not guarantee the same level of animal welfare or nutritional value, and the lack of clear regulatory definitions and standards for terms like eggs from pasture-raised hens allows industrial producers to manipulate the situation. Producers use various labels, which confuses consumers and undermines the market for real eggs from pasture-raised chickens. Moreover, the advertising budgets of large producers significantly exceed the funds of small farms operating on pastures, allowing them to take up more shelf space in supermarkets and influence consumer choices through aggressive marketing campaigns. These campaigns often emphasize the availability and convenience of regular eggs, not mentioning differences in production methods or nutritional value. As a result, eggs from pasture-raised hens, which are more expensive to produce and purchase, remain less accessible to the average consumer, allowing factory-produced eggs to dominate. There is also an ongoing debate about the environmental impact. Large producers claim that conventional egg production is more efficient and has a smaller carbon footprint per egg due to intensive farming methods. However, this ignores the broader ecological benefits of pasture-based systems, which improve soil health, reduce pesticide and herbicide use, and increase biodiversity. Focusing solely on performance metrics, such arguments overlook the long-term ecological sustainability of diverse grazing systems. Regarding heirloom vegetables, they are traditionally grown from seeds passed down through generations. These vegetables retain unique flavors and characteristics that are often lost in mass production. They are valued for their genetic diversity, making them more resilient to pests and diseases. However, in recent years, the cultivation of heirloom vegetables has significantly decreased due to the excessive emphasis on monoculture. Monocultures involve the mass cultivation of one type of crop, often genetically modified for maximum yield and resistance to specific conditions. This approach simplifies agricultural management and processing for large corporations, but also reduces biodiversity and makes crops more vulnerable to diseases and pests that can destroy entire harvests. The declining interest in heirloom vegetables is exacerbated by the fact that government subsidies and support mainly go to genetically modified and hybrid crops. These cultures are created for uniform results, which aligns well with the model of industrial food production, prioritizing efficiency and profit over diversity and sustainability. Farmers wishing to grow heirloom varieties often face a lack of access to the same financial resources as those engaged in monocultures. Moreover, the lack of investment in heirloom vegetable research leads to fewer achievements in optimizing these crops for modern agricultural systems, further hindering their cultivation. Moreover, the seed industry is increasingly controlled by a few large corporations that promote genetically modified seeds. These companies often use aggressive methods. Marketing and legal methods aimed at pushing farmers to use patented seeds can be seen as an attempt to isolate open-pollinated seeds used in heirloom farming. Legal and financial pressure on farmers, forcing them to adhere to these practices, makes the preservation of heirloom vegetables risky, as they lack the legal protections and market support available to larger industrial farms. Heirloom vegetables also face challenges in the market. Supermarkets and distributors often prefer genetically modified or hybrid vegetables, as they are bred for uniform appearance and longer shelf life, making them more appealing to consumers and reducing waste. Heirloom vegetables, possessing natural diversity in size, shape, and color, sometimes with a shorter shelf life, do not meet this standard. Such a preference for standardized products further limits the market for heirloom vegetables, making it difficult for farmers to justify their cultivation. Finally, consumer education also plays a role in diminishing interest in heirloom vegetables. There is often a lack of awareness about the benefits of these cultures, not only in terms of taste and nutritional value, but also in supporting agricultural biodiversity and resilience. Without clear labeling or marketing highlighting the virtues of heirloom vegetables, consumers are less likely to choose them in favor of more familiar and visually uniform options. This lack of demand strengthens the cycle of reducing supply and support, pushing heirloom vegetables to the background of agricultural production. Raw nuts like almonds, walnuts, and cashews are rich in essential nutrients, including healthy fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. However, despite their useful properties, there is a strategic push to promote processed nut products over raw nuts. This shift occurs for several reasons, including the desire of processing companies to make a profit and government policies that support long-lasting products. Processed nuts, such as roasted or salted, are more profitable as they go through additional production stages, adding value and justifying higher retail prices. Nut pastes, in particular, have become more popular and are marketed as convenient, healthy products, although they often contain added sugars, oils, and preservatives. Government regulations have contributed to this trend by introducing strict quality checks and high tariffs on the import of raw nuts. These measures are often justified by concerns about potential contamination or risks associated with pests in raw, unprocessed nuts. However, such measures disproportionately affect the import of raw nuts, while processed nut products remain largely untouched. As a result, the market sees a higher price for raw nuts, making them less accessible to consumers. Meanwhile, processed nuts face fewer regulatory hurdles due to their longer shelf life and ease of handling, enjoying a relatively stable pricing structure. Corporations play a significant role in the dynamic nut processing market. Companies that dominate this sector actively lobby for regulations that create barriers to the import of raw nuts, reducing the level of competition. These efforts include supporting stricter safety standards for food products, particularly raw foods, which they believe are more likely to contain pathogens due to their unprocessed nature. However, this viewpoint often ignores the fact that raw nuts can be safely consumed if proper storage and processing conditions are followed. By emphasizing potential risks, these corporations effectively steer consumers towards processed alternatives. There is also a subtle shift in consumer education and marketing strategies. Advertising campaigns often emphasize the convenience and taste of roasted and salted nuts or the versatility of nut pastes in various recipes, while downplaying the nutritional differences between raw and processed options. This marketing strategy leverages the mindset of convenience-oriented consumers who may not fully realize the added ingredients in processed nuts or the potential loss of nutrients during processing. Moreover, product placement strategies in supermarkets often provide more visibility to processed nut products by placing them at eye level or near the cash registers, which influences impulse buying. The trend towards processed nuts also aligns with broader practices in the food industry that favor products with a long shelf life and higher margins. The ability to transport and store nuts without the need for refrigeration makes processed nuts more attractive to retailers and distributors. This logistical advantage strengthens the preference for processed nuts over raw ones in the supply chain, further reducing the availability of raw nuts in the mass market. Beef from cows that are pasture-fed rather than grain-fed, primarily with corn and soy, is often marketed as a healthier and more sustainable choice. Such meat contains more omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins A and E, and antioxidants while having less fat and calories compared to grain-fed beef. Despite these advantages, pasture-raised beef faces serious challenges in gaining market share due to powerful lobbying from the industrial livestock sector. These efforts are aimed at maintaining the dominance of grain-fed beef, which receives significant government subsidies that lower the cost of corn and soybean feed. making industrial livestock farming more economically viable. Beef production from cows in pastures is inherently more expensive and labor-intensive than industrial livestock farming. It requires more land and time to raise cows in pastures, leading to higher costs that are then passed on to consumers. Large meat processing companies exploit this price difference by lobbying for continued grain production subsidies, ensuring that grain remains a cheap and accessible feed. The competition between pasture-raised beef and grain-fed beef is intensifying due to artificially lowered prices on grain-fed beef, creating significant obstacles for small farms producing pasture-raised beef that cannot compete on price. In addition to direct subsidies for grain producers, such companies also advocate for regulations that complicate the marketing of products from pasture producers. For example, labeling laws are often influenced by industry lobbying, leading to blurred lines between different types of beef. Terms like natural or free range can be misleading, making consumers think they are buying products from pastures, while in reality these labels may only indicate minor differences from traditional beef. This uncertainty allows grain-fed beef to capture a larger market share, appearing similar to pasture-raised products, although it does not meet the same standards. Moreover, marketing campaigns funded by large meat processing companies often emphasize the supposed benefits of grain-fed beef, such as its availability and consistent taste and texture, while downplaying or ignoring the merits of pasture-raised alternatives. These campaigns are strategically aimed at attracting cost-conscious consumers, effectively marginalizing pasture-raised beef as a luxury item for a narrow market segment. As a result, pasture-raised beef remains positioned as a premium product, available primarily to those willing to pay high prices, further limiting its market growth. There is also a lack of support for pasture-raised beef within the main agricultural policies. The infrastructure and supply chains formed over decades are largely aimed at producing grain-fed beef. For example, cow barns, slaughterhouses, and distribution networks are optimized for high-volume grain-fed cattle production, making it difficult for beef producers from pastures to find processing facilities suitable for smaller herds raised on pastures. This systemic bias in supply chain logistics deters new market entrants in beef from pastures and keeps production costs high, reinforcing the economic dominance of factory beef production. Seaweed, rich in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, has long been a staple in the diet of many coastal peoples, known for its health benefits like supporting thyroid function and improving gut health. However, their growing popularity as a superfood has provoked a hidden reaction from some agricultural sectors that see seaweed as a competitor to land crops. To limit the growing market for seaweed, several methods were employed, including lobbying for stricter environmental regulations on seaweed harvesting. These norms often reference concerns about the excessive harvesting of wild seaweed stocks, potential damage to marine ecosystems, and the preservation of coastal biodiversity. While these concerns are justified, they are sometimes exaggerated in the interests of traditional agricultural sectors. The introduction of higher tariffs on the import of seaweed, especially from major producers in Asia, is yet another way to impose restrictions. The availability of these tariffs is justified by claims of protecting local marine ecosystems and promoting sustainable practices. Yet at the same time, they make imported seaweed products more expensive and less competitive. This decision protects domestic agriculture by supporting demand for land crops and restraining the shift to marine alternatives. In addition, new standards for algae cultivation were introduced, requiring costly certifications and compliance measures that many small producers cannot afford, further reducing market participants and increasing prices. The nutrient profile of algae has also been criticized by regulatory bodies influenced by agricultural lobbyists, with concerns raised about heavy metal accumulation in algae, leading to stricter testing and quality control standards. These requirements disproportionately affect small companies that lack the resources to comply with frequent inspections. As a result, the diversity of seaweed products on the market has decreased, as only large companies can afford to meet the new regulatory standards. Moreover, the powerful dairy and meat industries see algae as a threat, especially as a source of alternative protein. Algae are being researched for their potential in producing plant-based protein products that could challenge the dominance of meat and dairy proteins. This prompted lobbying efforts to limit the promotion of algae as a sustainable alternative to protein, further marginalizing their presence in mass markets. Marketing restrictions were implemented subtly, prohibiting manufacturers from making certain health claims about algae without extensive scientific support, which is often costly for small brands. The cumulative effect of these strategies creates a controlled market environment where algae remain a niche product rather than a widely available superfood, despite their potential to support sustainable nutrition and reduce reliance on land agriculture. A hidden campaign against algae ensures their growth within certain limits, preserving the status quo of traditional agricultural interests. These 10 products represent not just a selection of food, but symbolize a broader struggle for control over the market, consumer health, and ecological sustainability. By restricting access to these goods, the government, often under the influence of powerful corporate lobbies, manipulates the market in the interests of certain groups. It is important for consumers to stay informed and understand the hidden forces shaping what ends up on their shelves. Do not let these backstage actions dictate your choice. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and constantly question the existing order.